So continuing with our theme of humanism and classical tradition, we're looking at a really, really famous artwork by a really famous artist, Michelangelo, and the Sistine Chapel. Not the 16th chapel. There's not 15 others. It's just the Sistine Chapel.
So this is located in the heart of Rome. It's part of Vatican City. And it was painted during the Italian Renaissance, which of course we know Michelangelo is a part of. And he was asked to paint this by the Pope. And he didn't love painting. He actually preferred to do sculpture. But he was asked by the Pope, and you can't really tell the Pope.
Asking is probably putting it nicely. It was more like you were told,
yes,
you're going to do this, and
so
he had no choice.
Reluctantly spent over 4 years of his life working on this.
At one point, he tried to leave and sneak away and to avoid working on it, but the Pope had him brought back. So, yeah, it was not something he was enthusiastic about making, but we're so glad he did.
Yes.
Because it's amazing.
Yes. It is a different type of painting. So this is an important vocab word. It's a fresco, which is basically where they spread plaster on the wall first and then paint into the wet plaster. And that helps to absorb the paint and helps the painting stay affixed to the wall much longer.
It sort of becomes part of the wall rather than paint sitting on top of a surface. It's definitely adhered on there. It's not going anywhere.
It's not going to just get wiped off or...
Right. And it's unforgivable because if you make a mistake, your only option is to basically chip away the plaster, replaster it, and start again. So it takes a long time to get it right.
But that's how this has lasted, over 500 years in pretty good condition. It has had to be touched up a little bit just because you can see there's a little bit of natural light with some windows coming in, but, they used to use lanterns and candlelight and things like that, so it started to build up kind of on the ceiling, and they had to clean it and restore it over time. And this is a part of the Renaissance, which means rebirth, and so it's a rebirth of those Greek and Roman ideas, and so that's why it's part of that whole series, is they were looking back at the Greek and Roman sculptures, and so you can definitely see that in Michelangelo's depiction of these figures. They're very muscular.
He has a great, profound interest in portraying the human body and doing it accurately. So even though this is all a religious subject matter, this is all illustrating scenes from the Old Testament, it's clear that Michelangelo's focus was on his skill in portraying the human body.
Right. So he, was obsessed with looking back at those, Greek and Roman exemplars and making these bodies look perfect. And a lot of people at the time were very offended that he used nude bodies. But once again, it's the fact that he's looking back at those nude sculptures from the Greek and Roman era.
This is where we get that idea of that cheesy fig leaf that strategically covers up certain parts of the body, because over the years there have been efforts to cover up some of the anatomy that was deemed a little bit too risque for the time period.
So let's talk a little bit about the subject matter. So it depicts different scenes from the Old Testament.
The most famous part of this has to be the scene depicting the creation of Adam. This is one of the most famous images of all time, and it's that image of God reaching out to Adam, and you're seeing the moment just before, just as their fingertips touch, and that ignites that spark of life in Adam. So Adam is laying there just barely alive, right? He looks very weak, but reaching out towards God. But the interesting thing about this is the way that God has been portrayed with all the swirling fabric and stuff. And if you look kind of closely at it, or you look at it for a second, it looks like a brain. And that was not accidental. There was very much an interest in combining religion and science. All of these artists, the term Renaissance man comes from this idea that they were multidisciplinary. So they were interested in math, they were interested in medicine and science. And so it's not a coincidence that God happens to take the form of what appears to be a cross-section of a human brain. Really, really fascinating stuff.
And another thing about the process here is a lot of people, there's this rumor that he lied on his back to paint these, but that's actually incorrect. He actually built scaffolding himself that he climbed every day. And you can imagine after 4 years, the crook he had in his neck.
Yeah, he was just staring straight up at the ceiling. It seems like laying on your back would be easier to paint something like this, but it wasn't very practical because of the curved surface of the ceiling.
Also came back 15 plus years later and painted the wall adjacent to the ceiling that connects to the ceiling. And he painted a scene of the Last Judgment.
You can imagine that he held a lot of resentment for the people who were involved in making him create this. I mean, sure, he was happy with how it turned out, but he had no interest in painting really at all. So he was very bitter about his treatment and about being forced to do that. And so in the depiction of the Last Judgment, there are, combination of there's angels and there's also demons. And there are some familiar faces that he painted onto some of the figures that are being surrounded by demons. So that was, again, not an accident. Plenty of people were mortally offended by this, but it was kind of like, well, what are you going to do? You're going to have him, redo it? Because that wasn't going to happen.
But you do see Christ, and then you see to the left these demons taking souls and some ascending to heaven. So he's depicting the scenes based on chapters in John. And then he even actually depicted himself in one of the figures as well.
Well, a figure. It's just the skin.
Yeah.
It's just the flayed skin hanging there, which represents, obviously, a lot of his own personal pain that he endured in making this artwork.